Hi! Today I'm going to show you how to make a ruffle skirt using your 1/2" gauge Cindy Wood looms. This is one ruffle skirt that I made for my niece. This is a size 4T. The waist is approximately 20.5 inches around and it's about 12 inches long. I found a size chart online that I used to help me with my measurements. This one I made on the 59 peg 1/2" gauge Cindy Wood loom. This is the outside of it. It's got a nice drawstring to it so that if you untie it, you can pull it and tighten the waist portion. And this is what it looks like from finished. If you turn it inside out, looks like that. And I'm going to show you how to make one. I'm going to do this one on a 55 peg 1/2" gauge, which should give you about a 19.5" waist circumference, which would be great for a size 3T. If you wanted to make a smaller size, like a 2T, you could use a 51 peg 1/2" gauge Cindy Wood loom. My written pattern instructions will have notes on how to adjust for various sizes. So to start for your ruffle skirt, you're going to need, first of all, your loom. This is, like I said, the 55 peg 1/2" gauge Cindy Wood loom. You're going to need roughly 40 yards of ruffle yarn. What I'm using and what I used for my other ruffle skirt is this Peyton's Pirouette yarn. It has 20 yards, and this 2 of these is enough for a skirt, and it's, like I said, it's very, like you see here, it's very full. Definitely want about, and I use just 2 for that one, so depending on the size that you're making and how full you're making, you might be able to get away with using a little less than 40 yards of the ruffle yarn. The ruffle yarn, once you take it off, unwraps and it looks like this. And it's kind of a netted. And this is the type of yarn that you want. It doesn't have to be Peyton's. Red Heart also makes one that's called Sachet. There's the Starbella. Any of these types of ruffle yarns will work for this project. You just need roughly 40 yards of it. Besides the ruffle yarn, for the waistband portion, you're going to need some worsted weight yarn. You really don't need that much. I'm just using, I don't even know what this yarn is. I have some scrap of it left over from a project, or maybe someone actually probably gave me this yarn. So, I'm not exactly sure how much you'll need. Estimate, I would say probably 40 yards. So that is what you need to start. And you also need a loom hook, and I like to always have a tape measure on hand just to measure in case I'm getting at the point where I'm wondering if it's too long or too short. So to begin, you're going to want to unravel some of your ruffle yarn, and you're working with this top portion right here. The bottom portion is a little bit thicker and the top portion is thinner. You want to be using this top portion here, and we're going to cast on our loom. You want to leave a little bit of a tail end that you can either weave in, or I just actually knot at the end, but I'll show you that when we do the finishing. So you're going to leave a little bit of a tail end and you're going to cast on, and you want the ruffle yarn to be facing inside of the loom. We're going to be working inside out. I find this easier to do for this project. And you're going to cast on using every single loop that there is, putting them on each peg. And it doesn't matter if you're using a 55, 59, or the 60, or the 51 peg. You want to do this to every single loop, placing And as you can see, we're going around and we're placing the next consecutive loop onto the loom. And you're just following along. Until you've gotten back. My colored peg here, I always use as my last peg in the row. So now we've cast on using a ruffle yarn. The ruffle yarn is all facing inside the loom. We're working inside out with this project. Now to start row 1, we're going to just simply knit, but instead of using every hole, to make it more full and bounce fluffy, I'm going to use every other. So you're going to take, there's going to be a hole here on your ruffle yarn. You're going to skip that one and you're going to put the next one on, and then you're going to bring your bottom stitch up over the top. And I'll show you from the other angle. I typically work like this. If you had it facing you, and this is kind of hard for me, you would take the empty, you would skip one of the holes and put the next hole on. And there's 2 stitches on now, and you bring the bottom over the top, leaving 1 stitch on. You skip one of the next hole in the row, and then you put the next one onto the next peg. And if you wanted, you could do several of these at a time and then go back and knit over, making sure that you're skipping one of the holes. Making sure that there's 2 stitches on each of the, and then bringing the bottom and you're knitting over. Make sure that the one that you bring over to the top is the one that's on the bottom, and then just pull down. And you can see we already are starting to get, and I find it easier for me personally to work this way. So I'm going to go around the entire loom, placing every other hole of the ruffle yarn onto the peg, bringing the bottom loop up over the top. And that is row 1 of the pattern. Now if you wanted to, you could just keep continuing doing that over and over. I do this for 12 rows, and that gives me the ruffle portion is about 9-10 inches, and then based on the size of the recipient you can change how wide you're going to make your waistband. So if you wanted it for like a larger size, you'd make this longer or shorter for a smaller. But I'm going to keep going around and do an entire row where I'm placing every other, and then I will join up with you. I'm going to actually do 2 rows like this, and then I'm going to show you what I do to help so that it's not quite as full, or the alternative method if you don't want to use every other. And I'll join you back up after I have 2 rows of my ruffle skirt completed. And like I said, you're just putting the every other peg or every other hole on every single peg of the loom, and then you're bringing the bottom, knitting over, bringing the bottom over the top. So that's pretty easy. I'm going to go ahead and do 2 more, or I'm going to complete this row, and then I'm going to do 1 more row, and I will join back up with you and show you what I'm going to do next. Okay, I'm just finishing up now my second row of doing knit using every other hole on the top of the ruffle yarn. I'm placing them on the pegs, skipping one, putting the next one on, skipping one, putting the next one on, skipping one, putting the next one on, skipping one, putting the next hole on the peg, skipping one, putting the next on, skipping, putting the next on. This is my last peg of my row. I want to make sure that I go back around, and any of the pegs that have 2 stitches on, I want to bring the top up over, or the bottom up over the top, I'm sorry, so that there's 2, and I want to make sure that it's actually the bottom. Sometimes when you're placing them on, you accidentally, they can get shifted around and you can end up bringing the wrong stitch over. So make sure that you're bringing the bottom up over the top. And now I have 2 rows completed, and what I like to do is just sort of tug down at all of the stitches, securing the stitches. Now, for the 3rd row, what I did for my skirt, the first one that I made, and I'm going to do for this one as well, just to help add some variation and also make it not as full, is this row I'm going to place every hole on top of the ruffle yarn, and then place onto the peg all the way around, and then bring the bottom stitch up over the top. And you can feel free to play around with how you use your ruffle yarn and your loom. You might find that you like using for the entire skirt, that you like using every hole on it. You might find that you like using every other. It can vary depending also on the ruffle yarn you use. I just get bored personally with doing the same thing over and over, so I think this is probably was my solution to switch things up a bit. So this is row 3, and all I'm doing is placing the ruffle yarn. I'm placing every single stitch all the way around every other hole, or every hole on the top of the yarn onto the pegs, every peg, and then going back and bringing the bottom up over the top. So I'm doing this for row 3. And I pull down to secure the stitches so I know that they're not going to pop back off. Right now it's going to look like this from the outside. From the inside you're going to see the layers of the ruffle. So row 3, you just want to keep going around, placing every stitch, every hole on top onto every peg, and sort of just unraveling the yarn as you go, and then bringing the bottom up over the top. And this is row 3. I'm using every hole. Row 5 and 6, row 4 and 5, I'm sorry, row 4 and 5, I did exactly like I did row 2 and 3. 1 and 2, I mean. I'm sorry, I can't think today. So for rows 1 and 2, we're skipping every other hole. Row 3, we're placing every stitch. Row 4 and 5, we're doing every other hole. And row 6, we're going to do exactly like row 3, like I'm doing now. And we're going to do every. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this row, and then I will join you back up when I'm starting on row 4. Okay, I just finished row 3. I'm going to start with row 4. Row 4 and 5, I'm going to do like I had done rows 1 and 2, where I am skipping the one hole and placing the second onto the peg, skipping a hole, placing the second onto the peg, skipping and placing the second onto the peg. And I'm going to do that all the way around, bringing the bottom and knitting over. And then pulling down to tighten it up. So this is the body portion of the skirt. I do 12 rows like this, and I alternate between doing 2 rows where I'm skipping every other peg, and then 1 row, or every other hole, not peg, every other hole on the yarn. I alternate between 2 rows where I'm skipping every other hole on the yarn, and 1 row where I'm using every. It's really personal preference. You could use you could just continue to do 12 rows where you're skipping every other, but this is how I like to do, or this is how I ended up doing mine. And so I'm going to do another 2 rows where I'm skipping every other hole and knitting over, and then I'm going to do row 6 where I'm placing every hole just like I did on row 3. So I'm going to keep working, and I'm going to join up, and then I'm going to show you how when I need to change to another ball of the ruffle yarn, I'll show you how I go ahead and do that. So keep working, and I'll show you how to cast on with another when I run out of yarn. Okay, so I've been working on my ruffle skirt for the body portion, and I am just about out of this current ball of yarn. So I'm going to simply leave a little bit of a tail end here and begin working again now with my second. And I'm going to leave both ends, I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail so that I can tie them together or weave them in, depending on your method you like to use, when I'm done. So I'm just going to, on this row right now that I'm on, I've been doing every other. And I'm going to finish up that row just like I was doing in this row. Like I said, I was doing every other. And I'm just going to bring the bottom up over the top. So for the ruffle skirt, for the body portion, you're just going to keep working, doing each row. You can either use every other hole or every hole in the ruffle yarn until your desired length. Like I said, I did 12 rows for the one I made on the 59 peg loom. This one I might do a little bit shorter. You can always take your tape measure and measure and see how long it is. So right now, I know it's hard to see the numbers, but right now the total length is about 8 inches, and I've done, I think I'm on row 6 or 7 now. So I think I'm going to make this one a little bit shorter just to save some time. You can make it however long or short you want, adding more or less rows, and also the ruffle yarn you use will have an impact on how long you make it, and that's why I like to have a tape measure on hand, because that way you can measure and decide how long you want it. I have a generic chart here that I found online, and typically for a size 2T or a 3T, for 2T you want about 10 inches, for a 3T you want about 11 inches total length. And that's going to be to the knee for length. So if you want a little bit shorter of a skirt or is more of a tutu, you can do less rows. So I'm gonna do about 2 more rows just to add a little bit more length, and then I'll join up with you on my last row. My last row, I'm going to want to make sure that I find it easier for my last row that I'm going to do to place every hole on each peg of the ruffle yarn. But I'm going to do 2 more rows using every other, and then I'm going to do a row, and I'll show you my last row. So I'm now starting on another row. I want to say I'm on row 7 now. I took a lunch break and I lost track, and really that's where it comes in handy to either mark down or rely on your tape measure. It's not an exact science. You can make these longer or shorter. The main thing is going to be when you join your worsted weight yarn, to keep track of that on how you do your waist. So I'm going to do a couple more rows and join back up, and I'll show you the last roll of my ruffle using my ruffle yarn, and then how we do the waist. Okay, I actually just counted my ruffles, and I have done 6 rows now, which currently measures about 7 inches. So I'm going to do 3 more rows. Row 7, I'm going to do, so that would make this 9 rows total that I'm doing for this size, which is the 3T ruffle skirt. Rows 7 and 8, I'm going to simply do where I'm placing every other hole on my ruffle yarn and knitting over. Now if you're going to do it on the 59 peg, I would suggest that you do 12 rows. And as I do this, now I'm realizing with the smaller loom, for the smaller size, I'm going to do 9 rows. If I was to do a size 2T on the 51 peg loom, I would only do 6 rows total before I started the waist portion. So I'm going to do 3 more rows, 2 where I'm skipping every other, and then my last row I'm going to place every single peg, or every single hole on each peg. And I will join you back up when I get to my last row before we cast on with the worsted weight yarn. Okay, I'm just finishing up row 9. And on row 9 I am casting on with every hole on the ruffle yarn, placing on each peg up until the last peg. And then I'm going to want to go and make sure that I knit over so that there's only 1 stitch that remains on each peg. So we now have the ruffle portion. It's inside out, because we're working with the ruffle yarn facing in, which I find just a little bit easier to work with. And now we're ready to begin our waist portion. Now we want to keep the ruffle yarn because we're going to bring it back up yet. Excuse me, I'm trying to get situated here. I'm using a worsted weight yarn. It's similar in weight to, it could very well be Red Heart Super Saver. It feels a little bit softer than Red Heart Super Saver. My guess is it's probably Hobby Lobby's I Love This worsted, I think it's called, yarn. I found it in my stash and it matches very well with the ruffle yarn that I'm using. So to start the waist portion, we're simply going to E-wrap cast on. I'm going to place a slip knot on peg 1, and my ruffle yarn that I had I'm just going to leave right there. I'm placing my slip knot on peg 1, and I'm going to E-wrap cast on every peg in the loom, on the loom, all the way around, and then knit over bringing the bottom ruffle yarn up over the top, leaving just one strand of the worsted weight yarn. And pulling down. So I'm going to continue going around, doing the E-wrap stitch. Bringing the bottom up over the top. And you do that all the way around until your last peg, and I'll join you back up. Okay, I have now E-wrap cast on with my worsted weight yarn, and I'm ready to start my next row for my waist portion. In this row, we're just going to purl every peg. So we're going to go around and we're going to purl every peg in the row. And now you're only working with your worsted weight yarn, and you're purling every peg. In this case, you're purling 55 pegs as you go around. I'm going to go ahead and finish up purling all 55 pegs, and then I will show you the next step in the skirt. Okay, I'm back at, I am purling, I did a row of purl, I'm purling my last peg. The next row is going to be a row of knit. And for the knit stitch, we're going to do the U-wrap knit stitch. So you're placing your yarn across the peg and wrapping it towards the back, and then bringing the bottom stitch up over the top. And that is the U-wrap knit stitch, and that is the knit stitch that we're going to use. And we're going to knit the entire row using the U-wrap. And I actually find it easier for me when I knit to work backwards like this. But however you work, you just want to bring your working yarn across the front of the peg and knit over. You don't want it to be too tight. And you keep going around like that, and you do all 55 pegs. However many pegs you're using on your loom, and then I will show you the next part of, we just completed a row of knit. The next part of this ruffle skirt is we're going to bring it back up. We're going to, hang on, I've got some stitches that got caught there. Your ruffle yarn that we had dropped into the middle before, we're now going to, you want to leave your working yarn, your worsted weight yarn here. And what we're doing here is we're doing a technique so that we don't have these gaps here when we start our waist portion, and so that it smooths a little bit, lays a little bit nicer like on this skirt. So to do this, we're keeping our working yarn up over here. We're bringing our ruffle yarn that we had dropped back down through the center back up, and we're going to cast back on with the ruffle yarn using every peg on every hole. Once we have both the ruffle yarn and the previous row's knit stitch, we're going to purl each peg, treating the ruffle yarn and the worsted weight yarn from the previous row as if they were one, bringing them back up and over. So we're doing a purl stitch. You can see here we have the ruffle yarn and the worsted weight yarn. We're treating them as if they're one, bringing the working yarn below and purling, taking both of the stitches, the ruffle yarn and the worsted weight yarn, and leaving our new purl stitch on. So you want to continue going around the loom, placing one strand, one hole from our ruffle yarn back onto the loom. You can go ahead and place several of these on at a time, and then going back and purling each peg treating that as if it was just one strand, but you're working with bringing both the bottom up over the top. I'll try to zoom in a little bit so you can see here I have both. I'm picking up and purling the new loop. This is the loop that will be placed onto the peg. The two stitches that were on there I'm bringing up, back over, and then pulling tight. Again, I'm doing that to the very next peg and each additional peg in the row. So continue on doing this to each stitch, making sure that you place the ruffle yarn on each one of the pegs and purling together, treating them as if they were one. I'm going to go ahead and finish this row, and I'll join you back up when I've completed it. Okay, I'm back at the beginning. I cast on with my ruffle yarn and I did a row of purl, and now we're at the point where we can cut our ruffle yarn, leave a little bit of a tail so you can work it in and weave it in and secure it, and your extra ruffle yarn you're going to want to make sure to keep on hand for when we do the drawstring portion of the waistband. So from now on, we are just working with our worsted weight yarn. We did a row of purl, and we're going to continue on with the knit purl. We're going to do a row of knit starting now. We're going to go all the way around the loom, doing the knit stitch. Once we've done a row of knit, we're then going to do a row of purl. Repeat the knit purl combination a total of 4 to 5 times for the size 3T. For my 4T1, I did it I repeated it 7 times. It really depends on how long you want to make the waist portion. But we're going to do a knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, row of knit, row of purl, row of knit, row of purl, row of knit, row of purl, for a total of 12 rows total. Sorry, I'm out of it right now. So go ahead and do 1 row of knit, 1 row of purl, and do that for 12 rows, and I will meet you back up.